Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that President George Washington personally chose the location for the nation's capital to be along the Potomac River and to be designed as a city unlike any other in the world, with wide avenues, beautiful parks, and impressive monuments? Learn that Congress met in several different cities before reaching a historic compromise known as the Residence Act that established a new federal district that belonged to the entire nation instead of any single state. Discover that the lands from both Maryland and Virginia were combined to create the District of Columbia, and that the new city was named in honor of George Washington, while D.C. became the district named after the explorer Christopher Columbus. Imagine you are trying to build a new house with your extended family, and nobody can agree on the city, let alone the exact plot of land.
Oh, yeah, because everyone wants home field advantage.
Exactly. Every single time someone suggests a spot, the other half of the family shoots it down. They complain that it gives one side way too much power. It's just the ultimate stalemate.
Right.
Because you aren't just choosing a zip code, You're choosing who gets the upper hand in the family dynamic forever. And usually someone just gives up or the house never gets built.
Which happens a lot.
It really does. But what if instead you find a completely empty patch of dirt right in the middle of nowhere and say, fine, we start from scratch right here. Nobody wins, so everybody wins.
The ultimate compromise.
Yeah, that blank slate compromise is exactly how the capital of the United States was born. Today, we are going on a deep dive into the origins, the near destruction, and the incredible evolution of Washington, D.C.
And we're basing this on the text, the foundation and spirit of the federal capital.
Right. And ultimately, we're going to use that history to figure out how you, the listener, can apply that exact same foundational strategy to your own life. Okay, let's unpack this.
So the creation of a permanent capital was, it was anything but a foregone conclusion. The city of Washington, which was named for President George Washington, obviously, and the District of Columbia, named for explorer Christopher Columbus, were born out of this really messy, protracted struggle.
How long of a struggle are we talking?
7 years. The founders spent nearly a decade arguing over where the permanent seat of the United States government should actually be.
Wow, 7 years just arguing about a location.
Yeah, and the core of what they were fighting over was this specific concept of a federal enclave. And that became official on July 16, 1790, when they established the city as the permanent capital.
Which I have to say, federal enclave sounds incredibly bureaucratic. Like when I hear that, I just picture a boring, fenced-off government compound.
Sure, it sounds a bit sterile.
But the underlying mechanics of it are actually about survival, aren't they? I mean, they needed a zone that was completely immune to state politics. Think about it. If the newly formed federal government is sitting in the middle of, say, Pennsylvania, and a massive riot breaks out, they have to beg the governor of Pennsylvania for protection.
Right. They couldn't afford to be a guest in someone else's house. Which brings up something really crucial. This raises an important question. Why did a newly formed federal government require a complete geographical blank slate to begin with?
Right. Like, why not just use Philadelphia or New York?
Exactly. I mean, those were already bustling centers of activity. They had the infrastructure ready to go. But it all comes down to absolute authority. If the federal government sat within a powerful established state, that state could exert, undue influence over national policy.
Or they could just refuse to help if things went south.
Yeah, exactly. The founders realized they needed sovereign dirt. They needed to assert this distinct, unified authority over all the individual states.
It's like picking a perfectly neutral restaurant for a really tense dinner between feuding family members. If you go to your brother's favorite spot, he's comfortable, he knows the waiter, he has all the power.
He's got the home field advantage.
Right. You have to pick somewhere neither of you has ever been. But on a practical level, how do you just conjure up sovereign dirt out of thin air? I mean, Congress finally puts this requirement in writing with the Residence Act on July 17th, 1790.
Cementing the permanent seat of government, yeah.
Right, but having a law on paper is very different from having actual physical land.
It is. And that is where the literal ceding of territory becomes the linchpin of the whole operation. So President George Washington was given the authority to personally choose the location.
Okay.
And he selected a spot where the southern boundary was bordered by two rivers, the Potomac and the Anacostia.
A pretty strategic spot.
Very strategic. But the problem was that land already belonged to Maryland and Virginia. So for the city to be officially founded in 1790, both of those established powerful states had to voluntarily cede or permanently hand over their own territory to form this entirely new district.
Giving up your own sovereign territory to create a neutral zone is just a staggering sacrifice. But once they secured this blank slate, they were faced with a completely different problem.
What to actually build on it?
Exactly. They couldn't just throw up a few brick buildings and call it a day. They needed a physical blueprint that communicated the ideals of a brand new nation.
So President Washington commissioned this French engineer named Pierre-Charles L'Enfant to draw up that blueprint. And Washington gave him a very specific mandate. He basically said, avoid the architectural mistakes of Europe.
Because European cities back then were pretty cramped, right?
Oh, incredibly. The major European cities of the late 1700s were often dense, winding, claustrophobic labyrinths. They grew organically over centuries, which meant they were crowded, dirty, and chaotic. So L'Enfant was tasked with designing something that felt fundamentally different to the human eye.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Coming from those cramped European cities, spreading everything out seems like a massive waste of real estate. Like, L'Enfant meticulously plans this massive grid system of streets, and he names the streets after the states, right?
Yep, the streets are the states.
And he places the U.S. Capitol building at the absolute center of it all. He demands grand boulevards, wide avenues, and these huge open ceremonial spaces for people to walk and relax. But why? Was this massive, spacious grid purely about aesthetics? Or is there a functional reason you wouldn't just pack the buildings tightly together for efficiency?
Well, what's fascinating here is the psychological impact of L'Enfant's architecture. It totally looks like a waste of space to a modern real estate developer, sure.
Yeah, so much empty space.
But it was actually a powerful psychological tool. When you place the Capitol at the absolute center of a grid, you are making a profound statement about the centrality of the people's representatives in a republic. L'Enfant's careful planning was built entirely around deliberate sightlines.
Meaning, like, what you can physically see from any given vantage point.
Exactly that. The design enables a visitor to stand on the steps of the U.S. Capitol and look straight down the expanse of the National Mall. From that one single building, you have a clear, unobstructed view of the Washington Monument and all the way down to the Lincoln Memorial.
Wow. It is almost like the architecture itself is forcing you to understand how the country works. Like, you can't just look at one building without seeing its direct relationship to the others.
Yeah, by physically connecting the branches of government and these massive national monuments through those unobstructed sightlines, the design forces anyone walking those grand boulevards to witness the massive scale and the deep interconnectedness of the republic.
It's basically the framework of a new nation rendered in stone and space. But that pristine, heavily engineered vision was nearly wiped off the map entirely. The permanence of this new capital was really put to the test. It faced near total erasure during the War of 1812.
Yeah, things got incredibly dark. British forces invaded the city in 1814, and the destruction they brought was just catastrophic. It wasn't just a military victory for them. It was an attempt at psychological annihilation.
They wanted to break their spirit.
Absolutely. Most of Washington, D.C. was reduced to ashes. They burned down the newly completed White House. They burned the Capitol building itself.
And they burned down the Library of Congress, which, to me, that is the most devastating detail. It is one thing to burn a building made of stone and wood. You can rebuild a wall. Yeah. But the Library of Congress housed the collected knowledge of the new nation.
Every single book was lost.
Every single one. Why target a library? It feels incredibly vindictive. Like, they weren't just trying to defeat the government. They were trying to give the country amnesia.
Well, erasing the memory and the intellectual foundation of a nation is a classic tactic of warfare. Break the spirit, erase the history, and the republic just falls apart.
Right.
But the response to that destruction is incredibly telling about the resilience of the founders. Because in 1815, Thomas Jefferson stepped in to single-handedly replenish the library's collection.
Just by himself.
Yeah. He offered up his own massive personal library, selling it to the federal government for $23,950.
Wow. Talk about a massive reset button for American knowledge. He essentially injected his own intellectual foundation into the federal government to replace what the British stole.
He really did.
But looking at the sheer scale of the destruction, I mean, the White House is gone, the Capitol is gone, the books are just ashes. I have to wonder why the government didn't just cut its losses. Why not abandon this ruined, swampy plot of land and move the capital back to Philadelphia or somewhere safer that was already built?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the decision to stay in the ashes and rebuild was perhaps the most crucial moment in the history of the federal enclave.
Because of what it symbolized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a statement of absolute permanence. Moving the capital would have signaled to the world that the federal government was weak, that it could just be chased away by a foreign military. Staying meant the republic was unshakable. And you have to realize, this wasn't some quick fix.
It's decades, right?
Generations, actually. The timeline of rebuilding and finalizing these grand monuments was incredibly long. The Washington Monument wasn't completed until 1884.
Wait, 1884, that's huge.
And the Library of Congress didn't see its current magnificent building finalized until 1897. Committing to rebuild a ruined city over the course of nearly a century, forever, solidified that specific plot of ceded land as the undisputed, permanent heart of the nation.
Just the sheer grit to stand in the ashes and build it back, stone by stone. But while those physical buildings were slowly rising over those decades, the human reality of the capital was undergoing a radical transformation.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you can't put a fence around a living city and say, hey, you're just a sterile political lab. It fills with people. It becomes a real city.
Yeah, and during the Civil War, the dynamics of Washington, D.C. shifted dramatically. You had part of the Union Army stationed right there in the city, specifically to protect the capital from Confederate forces across the river.
So it became a military camp, basically.
The city essentially became an armed fortress, yeah.
But it also transformed into a beacon. After the Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863, Washington, D.C. became a sanctuary.
A really important one.
Yeah, it became a permanent home for many freed slaves, including the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass. So the demographics completely shifted. By the 20th century, the city was growing at a breakneck pace. They expanded the National Mall, and the capital began developing this incredibly rich, vibrant international culture.
It was completely transforming.
Right. It wasn't just a federal enclave anymore. It was a living, breathing metropolis with its own unique soul.
And that rapid human growth introduces a profound paradox into the story of the federal capital. Because remember the original compromise, right? This was a territory designed from day one to be managed exclusively by the federal government, by Congress.
Not by a state.
Right, and certainly not by local residents.
So what does this all mean? Well, to you listening, think about this massive irony. The very city that was meticulously engineered to be the physical heartbeat of American democracy, the city with the grand sightlines pointing to freedom and liberty, did not actually allow its own residents to vote for the president until 1964.
It is a striking contradiction.
It's beyond a contradiction. It's wild. The citizens living right there in the shadow of the Capitol building were not allowed to elect their own mayor until 1973.
1973.
How does a democracy justify keeping its own core population politically silenced for that long?
What we are seeing there is the tension inherent in that original blank slate compromise.
Yeah.
The founders wanted a territory controlled entirely by Congress, totally immune to local politics.
Which made sense at the time.
On paper, sure. But a city isn't just a blueprint on L'Enfant's desk. You have this intense, century-long friction between being a pristine, politically neutral zone managed by Congress and evolving into a real city with citizens who naturally required and ultimately demanded their own democratic agency. The architectural blueprint just collided with human reality.
This tension between a central hub of power and the everyday people living in it isn't just an American phenomenon, though. If you look at how influence actually spreads, you see the exact same dynamic in the ancient world.
We're talking ancient history now.
Yeah, the history takes us far beyond the Potomac, all the way to the New Testament, specifically to the city of Ephesus, which was located in the Roman province of Asia.
Right. Ephesus functioned as a capital in every functional sense of the word. It was the undeniable center of gravity for that entire region.
And looking at the historical record here, Ephesus was an absolute powerhouse. It was situated just 3 miles from the ocean. And being 3 miles from the ocean wasn't just a fun geographic fact. It was basically the internet of the ancient world.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because ships meant trade, trade meant people, and people meant the constant cross-pollination of ideas.
It was a massive center of commerce and business. It drew people in, and it sent influence out across the globe.
That exact mechanism of a maritime port is why the Apostle Paul visited this capital for 2 full years at the close of his second missionary journey, as recorded in the book of Acts, chapters 18 and 19.
He knew where the influence was.
Exactly. If you want to change the world, you don't go to the quiet outskirts. You go to the hub of commerce, the place where ideas flow freely. You inject an idea into a port city like Ephesus, and the merchant ships carry it across the globe for you.
Which brings us to a really interesting philosophical shift in our source material. The text asks some very direct questions to frame this concept of a central hub for the reader.
Oh, right. It makes it personal.
Yeah, it asks, have you ever been to Washington, D.C.? If not, what is the most important thing you would like to see there? Why do you think it is important for the United States to have a capital city?
And then it turns that lens directly onto you, the listener. It asks, if you had to choose a place that was the capital or center location in your life, what would you choose?
That's a big question.
It is. Would it be a physical place like your home, church, or school? Or would it be found in relationships with your family or friends? What or where is the capital in your life? I absolutely love this framework because it makes me think about creating a personal enclave.
A personal enclave? How do you mean?
Well, just like the federal government realized they needed a neutral, solid piece of ground entirely free from the chaos of state politics, we all need a central place we can retreat to for guidance when life gets chaotic.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Maybe your personal enclave is a set of non-negotiable core values that you never compromise on. Maybe it's your closest inner circle of friends who keep you grounded and remind you of who you really are. That is your personal capital.
Capitals. Whether we are talking about the grand, meticulously planned sightlines of Washington, D.C., the bustling, ocean-adjacent commerce of ancient Ephesus, or the personal grounding points in your own life, they all function as necessary anchors.
Anchors. Yeah, I like that.
They're the spaces where your priorities are set, where your defining decisions are made, and where your core identity is preserved. Identifying your own capital isn't just a fun thought experiment. It is an active, vital process for navigating the world.
Let's take a step back and just look at the sheer scope of the journey we just took through the foundation and spirit of the federal capital. We started with a bitter 7-year political argument over where to put a neutral federal enclave so no one state had too much power.
It was a mess.
It's a total mess. Then we walked through L'Enfant's grand visual blueprint with sweeping avenues designed to teach the scale of a republic through architecture alone.
Which is brilliant.
We saw that vision literally burn to the ground in 1814, only to be painstakingly rebuilt over generations, anchored by Jefferson's massive intellectual donations.
Such a turning point.
Truly. We watched a heavily guarded federal zone transform into a thriving sanctuary and an international city whose own people eventually had to fight for the basic right to vote. And finally, we traced that exact same dynamic of a central, run-changing hub back to the ancient port of Ephesus.
It is a remarkable trajectory of how centers of power are built, destroyed, and reborn. And it leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
So the original Washington, D.C. was deliberately built on a blank slate of ceded land specifically to avoid the baggage, the history, and the undue influence of existing cities.
Right.
If you had to establish a brand new capital for your own life today, a completely new center of focus, energy, and decision-making, what comfortable old structures or what deeply ingrained habits would you have to completely leave behind to build it?
Wow. What would you have to cede to finally get your blank slate? That's powerful. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep thinking critically about the centers of influence in your own world. And remember, sometimes to build the perfect house, you just have to find an empty patch of dirt and start completely from scratch. Catch you next time. Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.